was pure family gaslighting when my golden brother's son deliberately poured coke on my computer to make me lose my job. His father took his side, but my parents backed me up and gave them a harsh ultimatum. My name is Dylan, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a UI/UX designer remotely for a creative agency based in Los Angeles, but I live in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a pretty sweet setup. I'm making that California money while paying Ohio rent prices. You could call it financial genius or geographic arbitrage, but honestly, I don't really care what anyone thinks about my arrangement. I live with my old man Robert, who's 64 years old. After my mom died 4 years ago, somebody had to make sure he didn't turn into a complete hermit. You know, the kind of guy who orders everything on Amazon and talks to the TV like it's going to respond. Dad's a retired high school principal who spent 36 years dealing with entitled little shits. And they're even more entitled parents. So he's developed quite the tolerance for bullshit over the decades. Also living in the house is Linda, who's 62 and my dad's second wife. She's a nurse who spent her entire adult life fixing broken things, both literally and figuratively. Somehow this translated into enabling everyone's worst behavior, all in the name of keeping the family together. Because apparently nothing says family unity like letting little sociopaths run wild without any consequences whatsoever. Now let me introduce you to the main antagonists of this story. My older brother Tyler, who's 39, and his absolutely charming wife Victoria, who's 36. These two geniuses decided to chase some cryptocurrency investment opportunity in Amsterdam for 5 years. Spoiler alert. It went about as well as you'd expect when people with zero business experience try to disrupt traditional finance. Turns out disrupting traditional finance mostly just means disrupting your own bank account and burning through other people's money. When their revolutionary blockchain startup turned out to be nothing more than an elaborate way to lose investor funds, they came crawling back to Ohio with their tails between their legs and their 12-year-old son Mason in tow. "It's just temporary," Tyler said when they showed up at Dad's door with 3 suitcases and a sob story. "Just until we get back on our feet." That was 10 months ago, and they're still here. And Victoria. Picture this carefully. If a Karen and a LinkedIn influencer had a baby, then raised that kid on a steady diet of essential oils and Instagram wisdom, you'd get Victoria. This woman had spent 5 years in Amsterdam calling herself an expat entrepreneur while Tyler burned through investor money, and she'd somehow convinced herself that this made her some kind of worldly business guru with deep insights into international markets. She spoke with this incredibly condescending tone, like she was constantly explaining obvious concepts to slow children who just couldn't grasp her superior intellect. She name-dropped European cities in casual conversation to remind everyone how cultured and worldly she was, and had this insufferable habit of starting sentences with, "Well, in Amsterdam, we," as if living there for 5 years while unemployed made her some kind of cultural ambassador. The woman documented every single meal on Instagram, called herself a mommy blogger, despite having exactly 15 followers, and used phrases like toxic masculinity and emotional intelligence as weapons whenever someone dared to call out her bullshit. She had that classic, "I took one psychology class and now I'm everyone's therapist" energy that made every conversation feel like a diagnostic session. And then there's Mason. If Satan had a kid with a Karen, then raised that kid on a steady diet of participation trophies and zero consequences, you'd get this little psychopath. The kid spoke English with this pretentious little accent he'd picked up overseas, called adults by their first names like he was their equal, and had this dead-eyed stare that made you wonder if he tortured small animals in his spare time. I'm not exaggerating when I say he gave off serious future serial killer vibes, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me tell you about the 10 months of escalating chaos that led up to New Year's Eve, because context matters when you're talking about nuclear revenge. This wasn't just one isolated incident. It was the culmination of months of boundary pushing, disrespect, and entitled behavior that built up to an explosive breaking point. The first warning sign should have been when Mason walked into our house and immediately started cataloging our stuff like he was planning a heist. "Dylan, why do you have so many monitors?" he asked. Not Uncle Dylan, or even just asking politely, mind you. This kid was straight up interrogating me about my property like I owed him an explanation for owning nice things. He wasn't curious. He was assessing, calculating, making mental notes about what belonged to whom. Meanwhile, Victoria was taking photos of our kitchen for her Instagram story. The caption read, "Midwest vibes, family time, #blessed," because apparently our home was just another backdrop for her social media performance. This was week 1, and already I could see where this was heading. By week 2, I came home from a grocery run to find this little shit rifling through my desk drawers in my home office. When I asked what the hell he was doing, he looked me dead in the eye with zero shame and said, "I was bored." Like breaking into someone's private space was a reasonable response to mild inconvenience. No apology, no embarrassment, just matter-of-fact entitlement. When I told Linda about the incident, she gave me that nurse voice of hers and said, "He's adjusting to a new country. Give him time." Victoria's response was even better. Mason is a kinesthetic learner. He needs to explore his environment to feel secure. Apparently, violating other people's privacy was just advanced childhood development in action. Week 3 brought an even more disturbing discovery. I was working from home when I heard this weird scraping sound coming from the bathroom. I went to check it out and found Mason using my electric toothbrush, my personal hygiene equipment, to clean the grout around the bathtub. When I confronted him about it, he shrugged and said, "It works better than a regular brush," like this was some brilliant life hack instead of completely disgusting behavior. When I mentioned this incident to Tyler, he just shrugged and said, "Kids are curious. At least he's being helpful." Victoria immediately jumped in with her psychology degree wisdom. This is actually showing great problem-solving skills and resourcefulness. In Amsterdam, children are encouraged to think outside the box. Yeah, Victoria, using someone's personal hygiene equipment as a cleaning tool is really thinking outside the box. Maybe next he could use my coffee mug as a toilet brush. That would be some real European innovation right there. Week 5 brought the food incident. I walked into the kitchen to find Mason making himself a sandwich with ingredients from a deli tray I'd specifically bought for a work video call later that day. He wasn't asking permission, wasn't even acknowledging that it might belong to someone else. He was just helping himself like he owned the place, and I was the guest in my own home. When I told Victoria about it, she said, "I'll replace it later," then launched into a lecture about scarcity mindset and how food restrictions can create unhealthy relationships with eating. She never replaced it, obviously. The pattern was becoming crystal clear. Mason would do whatever he wanted, Victoria would provide psychological justification, and everyone else was supposed to just accept it. But the real pattern became undeniably clear in December, and that's when I knew this wasn't just adjustment issues or cultural differences. I've got this small office set up on the second floor of the house. Nothing fancy, just organized enough to handle whatever design crisis comes my way. 2 4K monitors, a Wacom tablet, a color-calibrated display, all the professional equipment I need to do my job effectively. I had made it crystal clear to everyone when they moved in that this room was off limits during work hours. Not a playroom, not a hangout spot, just my workspace where I make the money that keeps this entire household running. This wasn't an unreasonable request, it was basic professional boundaries. One Wednesday afternoon, I was in a video call with my entire creative team plus some executives from our client company. High-stakes stuff that could make or break a major account. I stepped away for literally 2 minutes to grab a glass of water from the kitchen, thinking nothing of it since everyone knew the rules about my office. I came back to find Mason sitting in my chair, spinning around while my camera was still on and broadcasting live to 15 people. He was making faces at my coworkers and clients, treating my professional reputation like his personal entertainment center. 15 people were watching this kid turn my business meeting into his playground, and there was nothing I could do to undo that first impression. I grabbed him by the arm and physically removed him from the room, then spent the next 15 minutes apologizing profusely to everyone on the call. The meeting was salvageable, but barely. I could see the looks on my colleagues' faces, the way the clients were exchanging glances. My professional credibility had just taken a serious hit because of a 12-year-old's need for attention. When I confronted Tyler and Victoria about this incident later, they claimed that Mason had told them I'd given him permission to use the computer. It was a blatant lie, but they believed their little angel over their own family member without question. There was no discussion, no benefit of the doubt, just immediate acceptance of whatever story Mason had spun. Victoria's response was the final straw. "Dylan, I think you need to examine why you're so threatened by a child's natural curiosity. This kind of aggressive reaction to innocent exploration suggests some deeper issues with control and masculinity. Because apparently, a 12-year-old crashing my business meeting was innocent exploration, and my anger about it was some kind of character flaw that needed therapeutic intervention." Linda chimed in with her own brand of enabling. "He probably misunderstood. He's still learning English." The kid spoke 3 languages fluently and had been in American schools for months. But sure, let's pretend he didn't understand. "Stay out of this room during work hours." That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with normal family drama or typical adjustment issues. I was dealing with people who had decided their convenience was more important than basic respect, and they were raising a kid who thought other people existed purely for his entertainment, while his mother provided psychological justification for everything he did. The writing was on the wall, and it was about to get much worse. Thanksgiving should have been a warning shot for what was coming. We had the whole extended family over for dinner. Dad's sister Patricia and her son Kyle, plus Linda's brother Robert and his wife Michelle. It was supposed to be a nice family gathering, but it turned into a preview of the nuclear war that was brewing. Patricia's always been the family truth teller, the kind of person who says what everyone else is thinking but is too polite to vocalize. She doesn't sugarcoat things or dance around uncomfortable topics. Kyle's 30, works construction, and has exactly zero patience for entitled people or their bullshit excuses. He's the type who believes actions should have consequences, period. Michelle, on the other hand, is one of those suburban moms who thinks children are precious angels who can do no wrong, especially if those children are related to her. She's got that kids will be kids mentality that enables bad behavior in the name of being understanding and supportive. Everything was going fine until Mason decided he didn't like the way the adults were talking without including him in every single conversation. His solution to this perceived slight? He started throwing dinner rolls at people. Not playfully, not accidentally. He was deliberately winging pieces of bread at adults who were trying to have a normal conversation over Thanksgiving dinner. When Dad told him to stop this behavior, Mason looked right at him and said, "You can't tell me what to do, you're not my dad." The entire table went completely silent. This was Dad's house, Dad's table, Dad's food that we were all enjoying, and this little shit was throwing food around while telling the homeowner he had no authority in his own home. The disrespect was breathtaking. Victoria immediately jumped in with her damage control. He's overstimulated, it's a lot of people in one space. But then she couldn't help herself and had to escalate it further. Also, Robert, you're using a very authoritarian parenting style here. Research shows that children respond better to collaborative problem-solving than direct commands. Yeah, sure, Victoria. Let's collaborate with the kid who's actively throwing food at dinner guests. Maybe we can form a committee to discuss appropriate bread-throwing protocols and reach a consensus. Michelle immediately backed her up. He's just expressing himself. It's actually healthy for children to assert their independence like this. Because apparently disrupting family dinner by assaulting people with baked goods is just healthy childhood development in action. That's when Kyle, bless his heart, looked directly at Mason and said, "Kid, if you were mine, you'd be eating Thanksgiving dinner off the floor after I knocked you off that chair." Finally, someone was speaking Mason's language, the language of actual consequences. Mason immediately started crying, and Tyler got defensive. "Don't threaten my son like that." But Kyle wasn't backing down. "I'm not threatening him, I'm explaining what consequences look like. Maybe you should try implementing some sometime instead of letting him terrorize everyone." Victoria's voice went up about 3 octaves as she launched into full victim mode. This is exactly the kind of toxic masculinity that creates violent behavior patterns in children. Kyle, you're literally modeling aggression right now, and it's completely inappropriate. Because apparently suggesting that actions should have consequences is toxic masculinity and modeling aggression. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Before Tyler and Victoria left early with their wounded pride and their precious little angel, Patricia said something that stuck with me for months afterward. That kid's going to run into someone who won't tolerate his shit someday, and when it happens, it's going to be absolutely brutal. I had no idea at the time how prophetic those words would turn out to be. Fast forward to January 1st, 2025. The whole circus was assembled under one roof for what was supposed to be a fresh start to the new year. The house looked perfect. Everyone was playing nice and waiting for midnight, trying to pretend we were a functional family despite all the underlying tension that had been building for months. Dinner was this whole elaborate production. Prime rib, lobster tails, garlic mashed potatoes, asparagus, the works. Victoria had helped cook, which was her way of saying, "Look how domestic and helpful I am," without actually addressing the elephant in the room. Namely, the fact that they'd been freeloading for 10 months while treating the rest of us like hired help, who existed solely for their convenience. Everything was going surprisingly smooth until my phone started buzzing with what turned out to be a critical design emergency at work. One of our biggest clients had just rejected the entire campaign we'd been working on for months, and they needed a complete rebrand by January 3rd, or they were walking away from the contract entirely. This was the kind of crisis that makes account managers break out in cold sweats and start updating their LinkedIn profiles, because losing a client this big could sink the entire agency. I'm literally the only person on my team with access to the master design files for this project, so when I say I had to handle it personally, I mean a multi-million-dollar account was basically fucked if I didn't drop everything and fix it. No pressure or anything, right? I excused myself from the family gathering, headed upstairs to my office, and started pulling up all the design files I'd need to salvage this disaster. That's when I realized I'd left my external hard drive with all the backup assets out in my car. So I headed down to the garage, grabbed it, and started walking back upstairs to get to work on what was going to be a very long night. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of liquid hitting electronics. I rushed toward my office and found the door wide open, not just cracked or slightly ajar, but wide fucking open like someone had just walked out in a hurry. And there was Mason, standing right next to my desk, holding an empty can of Coke like he'd just finished performing some kind of ritual sacrifice on my equipment. My work laptop, the one with 4 days of unsaved design work, the high-end MacBook Pro that costs more than most people make in a month, was sitting there with Coke dripping off the keyboard and pooling around the base. The screen was flickering, then went completely black. 4 days of intensive work, gone. A critical client project that could make or break our agency, destroyed. But here's the part that still makes my blood boil whenever I think about it. When Mason saw me standing in the doorway, witnessing the destruction he'd just caused, he didn't look scared. He didn't look sorry. He didn't even look surprised. He looked satisfied, like he'd just completed a mission he'd been planning for weeks. This little psychopath had waited until I left the room, deliberately entered my private workspace, and destroyed my equipment with the kind of calculated malice you'd expect from someone 3 times his age. Then he did something that burned itself into my brain forever and convinced me that this kid was genuinely dangerous. He stuck out his tongue, gave me this smug little smirk that said, "What are you going to do about it?" And then, I shit you not, calmly raised his middle finger at me. This was a 12-year-old telling his uncle to go fuck himself in his own house after destroying his property while showing absolutely zero remorse for what he'd done. Something inside me just snapped completely. Before I could think rationally about it, before I could consider the consequences, I grabbed Mason by the shoulders and shoved him away from my desk. I straight up manhandled this kid like he was a physical threat that needed to be neutralized immediately. The rage that went through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" I yelled louder than I'd ever yelled at anyone in my entire life. "That's 4 days of work. That's my freaking livelihood you just destroyed." I was shaking with anger, completely beyond rational thought. Mason stumbled backward and immediately started crying. The real kind this time, with actual fear in his eyes instead of his usual crocodile tears. Then he ran out of the room screaming for his parents like he was the victim in this situation. I stood there staring at my dead laptop, knowing I'd just handed my family all the ammunition they needed to make me the villain in this story. But I also knew this wasn't going to be one of those boys will be boys situations where everyone laughs it off. This was war and I'd just fired the first shot. I walked downstairs with my dead laptop under my arm, my hands still shaking with rage, and called Mason out in front of the entire family. "You little shit," I said, and the whole room went completely quiet. Every conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at me. Mason was already positioned behind Victoria, tears still streaming down his face, playing the victim card for all it was worth. "Dylan attacked me," he wailed, before I could even open my mouth to explain what had happened. "He grabbed me and pushed me really hard." Just like that, the narrative was set. Suddenly, I wasn't the victim of deliberate property destruction. I was the grown man who'd lost his temper and put his hands on a child. The optics were terrible and everyone knew it. Victoria immediately jumped into full mama bear protective mode. "You put your hands on my son? What is wrong with you?" But she couldn't stop there. She had to turn it into a psychological analysis. "This is exactly what I was worried about, Dylan. You're clearly dealing with some unresolved anger issues, and now you're taking it out on a child. This is textbook displaced aggression, because apparently, a 12-year-old deliberately destroying my work equipment was innocent behavior, and my anger about it was a character flaw that needed professional intervention." Tyler stood up with his chest puffed out, trying to look intimidating. "Did you just assault my kid?" he demanded, like he was ready to defend his family's honor. So I laid it out for everyone. I told them exactly what had happened. The deliberate destruction, the middle finger, the complete lack of remorse, and yes, my physical reaction to it. No exaggeration, no justification, just the cold facts of what had transpired in my office. So you admit you put your hands on him? Victoria said, like she'd just caught me confessing to murder. She had this look of triumph, like my admission proved everything she'd been saying about my character. You shoved a child because of a computer, Linda added, her nurse voice dripping with disappointment and moral superiority. Tyler was nodding along in agreement. I don't care what he did. You don't touch other people's kids, period. That's crossing a line that can't be uncrossed. Michelle immediately backed them up with her suburban mom wisdom. Violence is never the answer, Dylan. That poor child is probably traumatized by what you did to him. But Patricia was studying the whole situation with her sharp eyes, and she wasn't buying the victim narrative. What happened before Dylan grabbed you? She asked Mason directly, cutting through all the emotional manipulation. Kyle leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. Kid's playing the victim now, but what did you do to piss off your uncle? Something tells me there's more to this story. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed them the evidence that would change everything. See, I'm a design guy. I believe in documentation and backup systems. I've got security cameras in my office specifically because I work with expensive equipment and sensitive client materials. The footage was crystal clear and showed everything that had happened. Mason walking into my office with the Coke in his hand. Standing at my desk for a moment, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Then, deliberately pouring the entire can over my keyboard while the laptop was open and running. Then turning around and giving me the finger when he saw me in the doorway. Then me completely losing my shit and grabbing him. I handed my phone to Victoria and watched her face as she saw the undeniable video evidence of her son's calculated destruction. See, she said, like the video actually vindicated her position. He destroyed your laptop, which was wrong, but look how you reacted. You're the adult here. Then she really got going with her psychology degree analysis. This video actually proves my point about your anger management issues. An emotionally mature person would have handled this situation differently. You're literally using a child's mistake to justify physical violence. Even with video proof of deliberate, malicious destruction, they were still defending him and painting me as the problem. That's when Dad, who'd been sitting at the head of the table through this whole shit show saying absolutely nothing, slowly stood up and walked over to watch the footage on my phone. He watched it once, then watched it again, studying every detail with the kind of methodical attention that had made high school troublemakers wet themselves for 3 decades. Then he looked at Mason with the kind of expression that had the power to make hardened teenagers confess to crimes they hadn't even committed yet. Mason, he said in that quiet, authoritative voice that could cut through chaos like a knife, apologize to your Uncle Dylan. But he hurt me, Mason whined, still trying to play the victim card, even though everyone had just watched him commit deliberate destruction. After you destroyed his laptop and disrespected him in his own house, Dad replied calmly, not raising his voice, but somehow making it clear that this wasn't a negotiation. Instead of apologizing, Mason did something that shocked even me, and I thought I'd seen the depths of his entitlement by this point. He looked my father, the homeowner, the man who'd been feeding and housing his family for 10 months out of pure generosity, dead in the eye and said, "No, he's mean and I hate him." The silence that followed was deafening. This kid had just told the patriarch of the family in his own house that he refused to apologize and actually hated the person whose property he'd destroyed. The audacity was breathtaking. Tyler immediately jumped to his son's defense because of course he did. Dad, you can't expect him to apologize when Dylan assaulted him. That's asking the victim to apologize to his attacker. I stood up and looked directly at Tyler and Victoria, knowing this was the moment that would define everything that followed. Time for some real talk, I said, keeping my voice calm but absolutely serious. Here's what's going to happen. That laptop was worth $3,100. It contained 4 days of unsaved design work that I now have to recreate from scratch, potentially costing me a major client. You have 2 weeks to replace it with the exact same model, or I'm pressing charges for destruction of property. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Victoria's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally settled on pure indignation. "We don't have that kind of money," she said, like this was somehow my problem to solve. "And we're definitely not paying someone who just assaulted our child." "I didn't assault anyone," I replied evenly. "I had a completely human reaction to watching my livelihood get deliberately destroyed by your little demon." Tyler finally found his spine and tried to assert some authority. "You put your hands on my son, that's the real issue here, not some laptop." "Some laptop?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The dismissive way he said it, like my work equipment was just some disposable toy. It's $300 worth of professional equipment that your kid destroyed on purpose, and I have it on video. That's when Linda decided to play peacekeeper with her classic conflict avoidance strategy. Dylan, honey, maybe if you apologize to Mason first, we could work something out as a family. I'm not apologizing for being angry that my property was destroyed, I shot back. That's not how accountability works. Michelle jumped in with her suburban mom wisdom. Violence is never okay, regardless of the circumstances. That child is probably traumatized by what happened. Victoria was building up steam now, getting ready to launch into full victim advocate mode. Dylan, this entire situation reveals a lot about your character. You're more concerned about material possessions than the emotional well-being of a child. That laptop can be replaced, but the trauma you've caused Mason. Shut the fuck up, Victoria, I shot back, finally losing patience with her pseudo-psychological bullshit. She gasped dramatically, like I'd just slapped her. How dare you speak to me that way? Kyle, who'd been quietly watching this whole clusterfuck unfold with growing amusement, finally spoke up. Lady, the only trauma that kid has is finally facing consequences for his actions for the first time in his life. The battle lines were now clearly drawn. Me, Dad, Patricia, and Kyle on one side. The people who believed in accountability and consequences. Tyler, Victoria, Linda, and Michelle on the other side. The enablers who thought children should never face real repercussions for their behavior. And in the middle sat one little asshole who was finally starting to realize that actions might actually have consequences. Victoria wasn't done playing the victim card, though. This is emotional blackmail, Dylan. You're threatening us financially because you lost your temper and can't control your anger. No, I said, maintaining my composure. I'm trying to force you to take responsibility for your kid's deliberate, malicious behavior. Tyler stood up and said, "We'll think about it." Like acknowledging basic responsibility was some kind of favor they might consider granting. Think about it. Like acknowledging reality was optional. Like paying for damage your child deliberately caused was up for debate. That's when Dad spoke again, and when he did, everyone listened. Tyler, Victoria, take Mason upstairs. We'll discuss this further in the morning. It wasn't a request. It was a command from the head of the household. After they left, Patricia spoke the truth that everyone was thinking, but nobody else had the courage to say out loud. That kid is going to end up in juvenile detention if they don't get their shit together soon. I went to bed that night knowing that January 2nd was going to be very, very interesting. The lines had been drawn, the ultimatum had been delivered, and now we'd see what my brother and his wife were really made of. Spoiler alert, it wasn't much. The next morning felt like the calm before a hurricane. There was this weird tension in the air, like everyone was walking on eggshells waiting for the other shoe to drop. Dad called us all into the living room before we'd even had breakfast, and I could tell by his expression that he'd made some decisions overnight. Mason was sprawled across the couch with his Nintendo Switch, legs draped over the arm like he owned the place, showing zero concern about what had happened the night before. It was like the destruction, the confrontation, the ultimatum. None of it had registered as something he should be worried about. He was just playing his game like it was any other morning. Dad looked at Tyler and Victoria with the kind of expression that had made hardened teenagers confess to crimes they hadn't even committed yet. After thinking it over last night, he said in that measured, authoritative tone, "I have a simple question for you two. Do you believe your son did anything wrong?" The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Tyler and Victoria exchanged glances, but neither of them answered. Mason kept playing his game, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire future was being decided in this moment. That's when my father decided to give everyone a practical demonstration in accountability. He walked over to Mason with a slow, deliberate pace that made everyone in the room tense up. Then he grabbed that Nintendo Switch right out of Mason's hands without saying a single word. "Hey, give it back!" Mason screamed, reaching for his precious gaming device. For the first time since I'd known him, there was genuine panic in his voice. Dad walked into the kitchen without responding, and we all followed him, drawn by morbid curiosity and the sense that something irreversible was about to happen. Dad opened the cabinet under the sink, pulled out a hammer, and placed the Nintendo Switch on the counter like he was preparing for surgery. "Dad, what are you doing?" Tyler started to move forward, but something in Dad's posture made him stop. "I'm showing everyone what it feels like to have something you value destroyed by someone who doesn't respect you," Dad replied, in that same calm, measured tone. Then he brought that hammer down on the Switch. The sound it made, that satisfying crack of plastic and circuitry being pulverized, was absolutely beautiful. Sparks flew, pieces of the screen scattered across the counter, and Mason's most prized possession became electronic confetti. Victoria screamed like Dad had just murdered her firstborn child. "Oh my God, that cost $400. You can't just destroy other people's property." "And Dylan's laptop cost $3,100, Dad replied calmly, setting the hammer down. "How does that feel, Victoria? How does it feel to watch something valuable get destroyed by someone who thinks your feelings don't matter?" Mason, who'd been watching his precious gaming device get pulverized into plastic fragments, finally showed some real emotion. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, there was actual fear in his eyes instead of that dead-eyed smugness. He started crying, not his usual manipulative crocodile tears, but genuine distress. "That's not fair, you're mean," he wailed. I looked my nephew straight in the eye and, without saying a word, raised my middle finger at him. Just like he'd done to me after destroying my laptop. The look of shock and outrage on their faces was absolutely priceless. But Dad wasn't finished with his lesson in consequences. "Tyler," he said, turning to face his son directly, "you have 48 hours to either pay for Dylan's laptop or find somewhere else to live. This house doesn't shelter people who refuse to teach their children basic decency." What happened next was like watching a nature documentary about cornered animals. Tyler and Victoria went full scorched earth, pulling out every manipulation tactic in their extensive playbook. First came the guilt trip. "How can you choose money over family? We're your son and grandson." Then the victim complex. "We're going through the hardest time of our lives, and now Dylan is threatening us when we have nowhere else to go." Then the gaslighting. "Dylan has serious anger issues. He physically assaulted our child. This whole situation is about his inability to control his emotions." Victoria was in her absolute element now, throwing around psychology terms like confetti at a parade. "This is classic scapegoating behavior, Robert. You're enabling Dylan's toxic masculinity by supporting his violent response to conflict resolution." But Dad had made his decision, and 36 years of dealing with entitled parents and their precious little snowflakes had made him completely immune to emotional manipulation. "This isn't about money," he told them with finality. "This is about respect, accountability, and basic human decency." That's when they decided to play their trump card, the nuclear option they'd been holding in reserve. "Fine," Victoria said with dramatic flair, "but we're taking Mom with us. She agrees that Dylan was completely out of line." Everyone turned to look at Linda, and for a moment I thought she might actually choose her moral principles over her pathological need to avoid conflict at all costs. This was her chance to stand up for what was right, to support accountability over enabling. Then she said, "I think Dylan should be more understanding. They're both at fault here." Even after watching the video evidence, even after seeing Mason's complete lack of remorse, she was still trying to split the difference and avoid taking sides. Dad's face went completely blank. That expression that meant he'd just written someone off entirely. "Then you can leave with them," he said. The next 2 days were like living in an active war zone. Passive-aggressive comments flew like bullets. Doors slammed like artillery, and whispered conversations stopped abruptly whenever I walked into a room. The house was divided into armed camps, and everyone was choosing sides. As the 48-hour deadline approached, I started to wonder if maybe I'd pushed too hard. Maybe I should accept partial payment for the sake of family harmony. Maybe destroying relationships over money wasn't worth it. Then I remembered the look in Mason's eyes when he flipped me off after destroying my property. And I knew some lines simply can't be uncrossed. The 48 hours came and went without a check, without an apology, without even an acknowledgement that they owed me anything. Instead, Tyler and Victoria spent the morning loading their car with righteous indignation and wounded pride. They'd found a temporary place to stay with Michelle and Robert, who apparently believed their version of events. As they were packing their final bags, Mason looked me dead in the eye one last time and said, "I'm glad I broke your stupid computer." "You know what, Mason?" I said, pulling out my phone and hitting record. "I'm glad you said that because now I have you on tape admitting you destroyed my property on purpose." The color drained from Victoria's face like someone had pulled a plug. "You can't record us without permission. That's illegal." "It's a one-party consent state," I replied calmly. "I can record any conversation I'm part of, and this conversation just became evidence of intentional destruction of property." After they left, I sat in my office staring at my dead laptop. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I had one more piece of business to handle, and it was going to be absolutely devastating. Remember how Mason was completely obsessed with his online gaming presence? This kid spent hours every single day on Discord, Minecraft servers, and Roblox, bragging to his little internet friends about how cool and European he was. His online persona was everything to him. It was where he felt powerful, respected, Important. Well, here's something most people don't realize about living in someone's house for 10 months. They learn your passwords, especially when you're a 12-year-old who uses the same password for absolutely everything. And Mason's password? Mason Amsterdam 2024. Because of course it was. The kid had zero creativity and maximum predictability. So before I called my lawyer to discuss pressing charges, I decided to log into every single one of his precious gaming accounts. His Minecraft server, where he was some kind of moderator and thought he was hot shit. I posted a confession message from his account. Hey everyone, I'm actually just a spoiled American kid who destroys other people's property and lies about it. I've been pretending to be cool, but I'm actually living with my uncle because my parents are completely broke and failed at business. Also, I'm probably going to be expelled from school soon, lol. But the absolute masterpiece was his Roblox account. This kid had spent hundreds of dollars of his parents' money they claimed they didn't have, building this elaborate avatar and virtual mansion. Rare items, exclusive skins, virtual real estate, cosmetic upgrades, the works. His Roblox character was basically his digital alter ego, the perfect version of himself that he presented to the world. I sold everything. Every single rare item, every piece of virtual real estate, every cosmetic upgrade that he'd spent months collecting. I converted it all to Robux and then donated it to random new players with a message. From a spoiled brat who just learned that consequences exist in the real world. Then I changed his username to Spoiled Brat Mason and updated his bio to read, I destroy other people's property because my parents never taught me that actions have consequences. By the time Tyler and Victoria figured out what had happened, Mason's entire online reputation was completely nuked. All his little gaming buddies had screenshots of his confession. The kid who thought he was hot shit and could do whatever he wanted was now a laughingstock across multiple gaming platforms. When Victoria tried to get the accounts restored, the gaming companies told her that since the passwords were accessed from the same household, they couldn't prove it was unauthorized access. Mason learned real quick that actions have consequences, even in virtual worlds. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying beyond measure? You bet your ass it was. Now, I thought that was the end of this whole ordeal. Family drama resolved, toxic people removed from my life, time to move on and rebuild. But I had seriously underestimated Victoria's capacity for petty revenge and her complete inability to accept responsibility for anything that had happened. About a week after they moved out, I started getting these weird messages from friends and coworkers. Hey man, saw that post about you, that's really screwed up. Is everything okay with you? Someone's saying some pretty serious stuff about you online. It turns out that Victoria had decided to wage psychological warfare using the most effective weapon of modern times, social media manipulation. She'd posted this massive manifesto on Facebook, Instagram, and, get this, LinkedIn. Because apparently nothing says professional networking like airing your family drama to potential business contacts and trying to destroy someone's career. The post was an absolute masterpiece of manipulation and victim playing. She painted herself as a struggling mother trying to rebuild her life after financial hardship, only to be violently attacked by her unstable brother-in-law, who had serious anger management issues and had physically assaulted her innocent child over material possessions. But she didn't stop there. She'd somehow spun the whole thing into this broader social commentary about toxic masculinity in the Midwest and how capitalism has corrupted family values. Because nothing says deep social analysis like turning your personal drama into a think piece about the decline of American society. She posted photos of what she claimed were Mason's bruises from my assault. Apparently, the kid had scraped his arm falling off his bike earlier that week, but Victoria presented it as evidence of my violent attack on a child. She included carefully edited screenshots of our family text messages, removing all context to make me look like an absolute monster who terrorized children for fun. The post went viral, at least among suburban moms and online activists who live for this kind of outrage porn. Hundreds of shares, thousands of comments calling me a child abuser and a psychopath. Random strangers were sending me death threats through DMs from accounts I'd never seen before. My favorite comment was from some mom in Oregon. This is exactly why I don't trust men around children. The violence is always just under the surface, waiting to explode. But here's where Victoria's psychology degree really showed its worth. She tagged my workplace, she tagged my clients, she tagged local businesses I frequent. She wasn't just trying to embarrass me. She was actively trying to destroy my reputation and my livelihood. She even started a GoFundMe campaign for Mason's therapy expenses and legal fees to protect our family from future violence. The description read like a domestic violence survivor story, complete with stock photos of sad children and statistics about family abuse. My phone was blowing up with angry messages from people I barely knew. My work email was flooded with people demanding that I be fired immediately. Some local mommy blogger even wrote an entire article about me, titled, "The Hidden Epidemic of Family Violence: One Mother's Brave Story." Victoria was absolutely eating up all the attention and support. She kept posting updates about how overwhelming the positive response was, how she was just trying to protect her son, and how she hoped her story would raise awareness about domestic violence in families. But then Victoria made the same critical mistake that always trips up liars and manipulators. She got greedy and overconfident. See, Victoria had gotten so caught up in her victim narrative and all the attention it was bringing her that she started embellishing the story, adding details that weren't true. She began claiming that I'd threatened them multiple times over the months they'd lived with us, that there was a documented pattern of abuse and intimidation, that I'd been drinking heavily the night the incident happened, which was complete bullshit since I don't even drink alcohol. She posted another update, claiming that Dad had been enabling the violence all along, and that she was now considering legal action against the entire family for creating an unsafe environment for children. She was painting our house as some kind of domestic violence hellscape where innocent children lived in constant fear. That's when I realized this wasn't just social media drama anymore. This was a calculated attempt to destroy my life and possibly put me in jail with false accusations of child abuse and domestic violence. So I did what any rational person would do when facing completely fabricated accusations. I posted the video evidence. Not just on my personal social media accounts, but everywhere Victoria had posted about me. I wasn't going to let her lies stand unchallenged. I created a simple, straightforward post with the security footage attached. Since Victoria has decided to lie publicly about what happened in my home, here's the actual video evidence of her son deliberately destroying my property and giving me the middle finger in my own house. This is what she's calling innocent child behavior that I supposedly overreacted to. But I didn't stop there, because I had more ammunition than just the video. I posted the audio recording of Mason admitting he was glad he broke my stupid computer. I posted screenshots of the text messages Victoria had carefully edited, showing the full context she'd deliberately removed to make me look bad. I posted photos of my destroyed laptop and receipts showing exactly how much it had cost me. Then I posted the absolute best part, a compilation video of Victoria's social media posts from their time in Amsterdam, showing her bragging about their entrepreneur lifestyle while living off investor money, calling herself an expat business consultant while being completely unemployed, and posting photos of Mason in expensive restaurants while claiming they were building their empire. The caption read, "This is the woman claiming financial hardship while refusing to pay for her son's deliberate destruction of my property. The same woman who spent 5 years posting luxury lifestyle content while burning through other people's money." Notice the pattern here? The response was immediate and absolutely brutal. Within hours, Victoria's post had gone from viral sympathy magnet to viral cautionary tale about the dangers of believing everything you read on social media without getting the full story. Comments that had been supporting her and calling for my head were now calling her a liar and a fraud. People were sharing the video with captions like, "This is why you should always get the full story before jumping to conclusions," and "Another fake victim exposed by actual evidence." The mommy blogger who'd written that article about me published a retraction the next day, with the title, "Why We Need to Verify Stories Before Signal Boosting Them, a Lesson in Media Literacy." But the absolute best part was what happened to the GoFundMe campaign. Once people realized Victoria had been lying through her teeth, they started demanding refunds for their donations. The platform investigated and discovered she'd raised almost $2,400 from strangers who thought they were helping a domestic violence survivor and her traumatized child. When the truth came out, GoFundMe not only refunded everyone's money, but permanently banned Victoria from the platform for fraud. Her attempt to profit from false accusations had backfired spectacularly. She tried desperately to delete everything, all her posts, all her updates, all her victim advocacy content. But the internet is forever, and screenshots of her lies were everywhere, along with the video evidence proving she'd fabricated the whole story for sympathy and money. Victoria went from victim advocate to cautionary tale about social media manipulation in about 48 hours. Her reputation was completely destroyed. But I still wasn't done, because attempted character assassination isn't a game I play halfway. If someone tries to destroy my life with lies, I'm going to make sure they face every possible consequence. Here's something most people don't know about homeowners insurance. It covers malicious destruction of property by guests, even if those guests are family members. And I had crystal clear video evidence of a minor deliberately destroying $300 worth of equipment while staying in the insured residence. I filed a claim with our insurance company, providing them with the video evidence and all the documentation. The insurance company agreed that this was a clear case of intentional property destruction. They cut me a check for the full replacement value of the laptop, then exercised their right of subrogation to recover the money from the responsible parties, which meant that Tyler and Victoria were now being sued by a major insurance company for $300 plus legal fees and court costs. Suddenly, this wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a legal nightmare that would follow them for years. But that was just the opening move in my campaign of consequences. Remember how Mason had been enrolled in the local elementary school during their stay? I had a very informative conversation with the principal about my nephew's behavioral problems, mentioning the video of him destroying property and flipping off adults, and suggesting they might want to review their own security footage to see if there had been any similar incidents. Turns out there had been several incidents that the school had been trying to handle quietly. Mason had been caught on camera stealing items from other kids' backpacks, deliberately breaking classroom supplies, and even spitting in a teacher's coffee cup when he thought no one was looking. The school board voted unanimously to expel him. His academic record would now permanently reflect that he'd been kicked out for behavioral problems, which would follow him to whatever school was unlucky enough to accept him next. Meanwhile, Michelle and Robert were discovering firsthand what it was like to live with my brother's family on a daily basis. Within 2 weeks of taking them in, they were politely asking Tyler and Victoria to find somewhere else to stay. Something about Mason destroying Robert's vintage fishing gear and Victoria helping herself to Michelle's prescription medications without asking. And here's the kicker that made all of this worthwhile. Once the video evidence went public and people realized they'd been manipulated, several of Victoria's former supporters started coming forward with their own stories about her manipulation and lies. Turned out this wasn't her first attempt at playing the victim for sympathy and money. A woman from their Amsterdam expat community posted about how Victoria had run the exact same scam there, claiming her husband was abusive to get free housing and donations from well-meaning people, only to be exposed when someone discovered that the bruises she'd photographed as evidence were actually from her kickboxing class. Victoria's reputation was completely and permanently destroyed. Every Google search of her name brought up the video and articles about her false domestic violence claims. She was effectively unemployable in any field that required credibility or trust, which was pretty much every field that mattered. Linda lasted exactly 4 weeks before she came back to Dad's house, hat in hand, asking for forgiveness and begging to be allowed back home. She'd finally gotten a taste of what it was like to deal with Tyler, Victoria, and Mason without the buffer of other family members to absorb their toxicity. Dad's response was simple and final. "You made your choice, Linda. Now live with it." She ended up moving in with her sister in Lansing, probably spinning some story about how the family had fallen apart due to my anger issues. But the best part, the part that still makes me smile whenever I think about it, came about 7 months later. Tyler had to declare bankruptcy to deal with the insurance lawsuit and the mounting legal fees from trying to fight the fraud charges. Their credit was completely destroyed. They had no income, no prospects, and no one left who was willing to help them. They ended up moving back to Amsterdam, but not because they had incredible opportunities waiting for them there. They moved back because it was literally the only place they could afford to live on their non-existent income. They were completely broke, completely discredited, and completely out of options. Victoria's social media presence never recovered from the exposure. Every platform she tried to rebuild on, someone would inevitably post the video of Mason destroying my laptop within days of her creating a new account. She couldn't escape the consequences of her lies, no matter how many times she tried to reinvent herself online. Last I heard through the family gossip network, Victoria was working as a hotel maid in Amsterdam, and Tyler was delivering food on a bicycle like a college student. The expat entrepreneurs, who had looked down on everyone else for not being worldly enough, were now scraping by in jobs that required zero qualifications. Mason was enrolled in a Dutch school with strict discipline policies and absolutely zero tolerance for American-style entitlement. The kid who thought consequences were optional was about to get a PhD in accountability, European style. From what I understand, Dutch schools don't mess around with behavioral problems the way American schools do. The kid who had spent months terrorizing our household, destroying property, and disrespecting everyone around him was finally in an environment where his actions would have immediate and unpleasant consequences. No more psychology degree explanations from mommy. No more enablers making excuses for his behavior, just cold, hard reality. A year later, I'm living in my own place downtown Cleveland. A nice apartment with a great view and a zero-tolerance policy for disrespect. I've got new equipment, better security systems, and absolute peace of mind knowing that no entitled family members can access my workspace. Dad and I have dinner together once a week now, and our relationship is stronger than it's ever been. Removing the toxic elements from our lives allowed us to actually enjoy each other's company again. He's told me several times that he's proud of how I handled the situation, and that he should have put his foot down much earlier. The work situation ended up being fine, by the way. My team and clients were incredibly understanding when I explained what had happened, and the insurance money allowed me to upgrade to even better equipment. If anything, the whole experience made me more careful about backing up my work and protecting my professional boundaries. I got a New Year's card from Amsterdam last month. Just a simple card with no return address, but I recognized Tyler's handwriting immediately. It contained exactly 2 words: "You win." No apology for the months of disrespect. No acknowledgement of the property destruction or the false accusations. No recognition that their child's behavior had been completely unacceptable. Just a simple admission that the game was over, and I'd played it better than they had. And you know what? That card was worth more to me than any apology could have been. It was Tyler finally admitting that actions have consequences, that respect matters, and that you can't just treat people like garbage without eventually facing the music. The whole experience taught me something important about family dynamics and enabling behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst instincts. Dad's decision to support accountability over family harmony ultimately saved our relationship and forced Tyler's family to face reality. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Honestly, no. Maybe I would have been more strategic about documenting everything from the beginning, but the core principle remains the same. Respect is non-negotiable, and consequences are necessary for growth. Mason is probably a better person now because he finally learned that the world doesn't revolve around him. Tyler and Victoria might eventually develop some humility and self-awareness. And if they don't, well, that's their choice to make. As for me, I'm living my best life, making California money while paying Ohio rent, working in a space that no one can violate, and maintaining relationships only with people who understand that respect goes both ways. Sometimes nuclear revenge isn't about hatred, it's about enforcing boundaries that should have been respected from the beginning. And sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the hard-earned wisdom that comes from facing the consequences of their actions. The end result: a 12-year-old learned that actions have consequences, 2 adults learned that manipulation has limits, and I learned that sometimes you have to be willing to burn bridges to protect your peace of mind. And honestly, I sleep better at night knowing that I stood up for myself when it mattered most.